So I think many of you are traveling from abroad, from countries like Brazil or China or South Africa, and I'm sure that you know the importance of land and how much land is relevant in shaping societies, and as it was in the past, as always will be. And so I'm here to share with you the experience of the International Land Coalition in the lifespan of 25 years, which was created as a result of a conference, an international conference called by civil society together with international organizations such as FAO, IFAD, the European Commission, and many others. And the outcome of this conference was, in fact, to set up, to make the point about the importance of land tenure to overcome poverty. And since then, of course, in 25 years, many things change, and also very fast. But the basic challenge that we have in front of us is still there. And when the ILC, the International Land Coalition, was created in 1995, all the lessons were coming from the experience of the agrarian reform led by progressive leaders and done by states in light of inequality, pre-war and after the Second World War. And but in 1995, when the International Land Coalition was created, there was the extreme polarization between what is a state land reform, and what is a market-assisted land reform. So the idea of building a space of dialogue was very much not a flat position between the role of the state and the role of the market, but it was trying to build bridges and trying to grow into a space of dialogue where action can become collective actions. And at the beginning, the International Land Coalition was composed by 25 organizations, and now we have more than 300 organizations, all of those concerned by the importance of land rights. As you can see, I'm trying to move these to give you more of the mission, the vision, and the goal of what we are aimed for. And what is very much important is that that land rights are important, isn't it? I think all of us can say why land is important for food, for identity, for climate, for economy, but for many different things. But definitely, distributing land or land access is in fact a way to addressing power asymmetries. And that's what the coalition is about. It's not land for land. No, when we go into Peru, for instance, that went through an agrarian reform process, land, and now we are back to a very high level of concentration, land was redistributed to include farmers and to make people who are invisible, usually living very out in marginal condition, into transform them into active citizens. And that's what land reform are about. The way in which you govern land can result in very just, sustainable, equitable societies, or on the contrary, the way in which you don't govern land, it's resulting in conflict, in unsustainability, and on inequality. And so when I refer to, I don't know why I cannot change my slides. Okay, so it's very much shifting power back to people. We are convinced as International Land Coalition there can be no system change if there is no power shift. And the importance of land was reconfirmed in May 2012 by the Committee of Food Security, set by the FAO, with the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of land tenure of land, fisheries, and forestry. And that was after the framework and guidelines developed by the African Union and before the responsible principle of investment in agriculture and food system by the Committee of Food Security. So definitely there is a concept of responsibility toward the people and the planet that was set, but there is still a very long way to go to enforce it. And that's why the members of ILC came together by saying it's enough. We want to strengthen the voluntary guidelines. We want to do more. And we want to make people at the center of it. So that's where they developed the concept of people-centered land governance, and they identify 10 commitments that are relevant to them, that consider the DNA and the compass of what we do as a collective actions. And those goes, of course, by the security of land rights, but also the recognition of diverse tenure system, the equality of land rights for women, the security of land rights for indigenous people, the power of locally managed ecosystem, the importance of inclusive decision-making, of transparent and accountable information, effective action against land grabbing, and protection of land rights defender. When it comes to the land grabbing, I guess you know the difference between a land grabbing and a land investment, and that's the violation of human rights. Many land investments are coming into place, and we are now speaking of deals of even millions of hectares. So it's a very big portion of our land, of our that it's going into those transactions. And we have been monitoring how many of those cases are infringing human rights principles, as for instance, the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples. So because the topic of the presentation was also on how land, what are the nexuses? Now I listened very carefully the presentations before me, and I like this idea of complex system and how do we deal with those complex systems. So why land is important? Now we see how water is important because of water scarcity and the importance of it. And land, in fact, when it's grabbed, it's very much attached to water. So we have monitored that the most, the big land deals that have been made all above 200 hectares are very much attached to source of waters. And that's where we have also observed that many land defenders have been suffering of criminalization and even killing in many cases. So I want to bring you, if may I, my modest presentation is how land is related to many other components. And so definitely climate, that is also the reason why we are here discussing about the emergency, the climate emergency, but also about the shrinking of civic space and the democratic processes, as well as also the food systems and the peace and conflicts that I mentioned. So if you will allow me, when I think of power shift, it's the power of people, no? And that's when ILC is composed by many organizations that are local organizations, even nationally or regionally, representing people who depend on land. And what been showing how good they are in taking care of their land and their ecosystems. And those can be pastoralists, can be fisher folks, can be forest dwellers, can be local communities, and many others. So when it comes to peace and inequality, so we collected a lot of evidence that free market per se cannot address inequality, neither poverty, isn't it? I think we all agree that the free market is not the way to go, and cannot definitely support social transformation or, I don't know, transition, but definitely not transformation. So when it comes to land, we observed many projects where we have small-scale land funds that are promoted by World Bank or by other financial institutions that have been unable to upscale impact. So they can stay in small sites, they can provide some experience, they in some cases provide some negative effect, like in that situations. And when it comes to national land funds, what is like in many peace agreements, let's say, I don't know if any of the participants is coming from Colombia or Guatemala, you know that, for instance, in the peace agreement out of those civil war, there were a component attached to land, because land is a cause of war, but is also a mean of peace. And so in that case, there were the plan attached to the peace agreement were to establish land funds, and they never took off. It doesn't work. It doesn't work when you have people living in condition of poverty to access land through market, and doesn't work when you have a huge demand against the very limited offer. So we know that doesn't work, but nevertheless, despite after this the experience of agrarian reform around the world, land inequality is since 1980s is once again on the rise. And we know now that 1% of large-scale farmers are controlling and operating over 70% of the world agricultural land. And on the contrary, the 80% of the small farms are operating with a piece of land that are below 2 hectares. Just to say, and the global food systems goes with the big, and the local food system goes with the small scale farmers. Just to say, there is something, especially when you speak about food security and food sovereignty, how much is important to support the small scale agriculture and agroecology that is coming out very vocally in the time of crisis. And of course, because I know that, so the concentration is rising, the inequalities are rising, and I know that when it comes to measurement of inequality, we always refer to the Gini coefficient. This has been the way in which I studied at the university in Florence, and the Gini coefficient is the way to measure inequality. And when it comes to the current situation, we assessed, there is a publication, I can put the references so that you can contact me if you want to assess this source of information. A recent publication that is called Uneven Ground, Land Inequality at the Earth of Unequal Society, that has been published by ILC together with Oxfam, is in fact also assessing the measurement of those, the capacity of measuring inequality. And we propose a new enhanced Gini coefficient where we include, for instance, landlessness, that is not there, the quality of land, and the typology of multi-land holdings that was missing in the current traditional Gini coefficient. And if we use this enhanced Gini coefficient and apply in 17 countries, and we definitely have the indication that land inequality is much worse than previously thought. So we say there is the need to redistribute land vis-a-vis to the demand, vis-a-vis to the condition many countries are facing in terms of polarization. And of course, the land concentration is also concentrating power. And as I mentioned before, the reference to controlling water or controlling the forestry or controlling the natural assets and resources can escalate in conflict. And that's what is happening. There is an increase of conflict related to access to land and natural resources that in fact is determined by the pressure on those resources. And also there is another study that is showing how much, if those problems are not fixed, are coming back. And so there is a frequency that is increasing, but also there is the possibility, the chance that the conflict re-arise if this has not been solved. And so we see how many conflicts are moving into also bigger escalating, into war, and we know the damage of it in terms of displacement. And those are definitely escalated and fueled by today global challenges. When it comes, for instance, to climate, and we know how much, for instance, pastoralists and transhumant people are depending on water, and they have no water anymore access, and they enter into other land that belongs to indigenous people or farmers. That's where you have a land conflict, as well as landless entering into indigenous peoples, as well as when a big company enters into the village land. So those are conflicts that are determined by the control of those resources. And even in terms of conservation, that will be the end of my presentation, but there is an increase of conflict that are determined by the green wave. So we want to become green to all cost, and we do it sometimes at the cost of people, and that's where conflicts can arise. So there was also in the life of ILC very much the tension between the individual property rights versus the collective, the commons. So we know, and that was in the 90s, Lynn Armstrong published the Governing the Commons, and on the other side in 2000, Nando De Soto published The Mystery of Capital with two different oppositions. On one hand, De Soto was saying individual private property is the way to go. This is the discriminant to become a developed country. And the other side was the point of Ostrom giving value to the commons and how much we go into the collective management of resources. And I think at some point there was a replacement of the collective and ancestral of customary systems going into private property. And this has been recognized lately that was not right. And so because the individual property right that is became there is a sacrality of private property in some constitutions that are very neoliberal, doesn't apply where you have different contexts. It doesn't apply where you have a collective way of living the nature. And you cannot transform this collective way of living the nature into something that is private property. You cannot. People resist. Doesn't work. And so you can find some way of cohabiting the two, but definitely it's not the only way to go, the individual property right. So finally, the commons have been brought back into the power of what people are managing forestry. We saw from Switzerland to Albania to DRC, the importance of having those old rivers. Now the importance of managing these under a collective. And if you reminded the 8 principles of Lina Onstrom, I think those are very valid still in the way in which we are discussing now. Are very much how we see how we build the future coming from the bottom. How do we build the future really coming from the local communities? So she said, for instance, let's say a rangelands in a pastoralist community. Commons, the rangelands, need to have clear boundaries in spatial and societal terms. So what are these ecological boundaries and what are these people boundaries that we are considering? And those two, the local people and the ecological parameters, set the rules. So there is no one size fits all, but there are many different ways of living the commons. And this needs to be reiterated by a permanent inclusive decision-making process where there is a reciprocal accountability that is based on collective monitoring. So it's the community monitoring if there is water or no water, and how do they respond to this? And how do they manage the ecosystem in a way that it's sustainable? And also, if you break the rules, after you break now, you can break the rules. This should be done with a gradual sanction process. So you should not go and build the resentment, but you still need to aim for collective trust. You can have a mediation conflict in place. You need your system of the management of the commons to be recognized by the local authorities, and you need to build a network of commons, because there is a vast plurality of local commons and customary systems that value to be put together. So just to, I know that I'm running out of time, so I will probably move to the gender change that it's relevant also in the environmental discussion, because gender, when it comes to women role and the way women land rights, there is a chronicle discrimination there. It has been testified by the Committee of the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, where land rights are, there is a gender gap. And just to make you a sample, if you have if you live in a village in Cameroon and your husband is passing away, the brother of your husband is coming to pick you, not to take out your land. And you have no more means of surviving. So you need to find another solution. And the same that usually is migrate or coming back to your family. But the same, for instance, if you are a young, a newborn in Jordan and you're a woman, you have formally the right to inherited land, but in practical terms, you don't inherit land. And we know how much land, how much women are important to move the system of democracy and the leadership of agriculture and climate as well. Just to give you 4 examples, when women perform almost 50% of agricultural work, but only 15 own agricultural land. And there are studies that if you don't have land, in the average, 60% more of your children are malnourished, and there is 8 times, if you own land, there is 8 times less likely the possibility to have domestic violence. So in a way, it's an empowering factor into the context where you live. And the same is with the intergenerational gap. Now, many of the commons that we described before are not sustainable anymore if the young people are not part of the decision making in the same commons. So we need to really take care of how the young generation can shape the rural landscape. Just to come to the last, that it's very much. I think I have only one answer to the topic of the agenda of the conference. That is, what is the strategy now for ecological and societal transformation or transition? From ILC, we think land rights is a pathway out of the climate emergency. We need to fix this to make sure that at the end we are really moving ahead into solution. And so far, the climate instrument that we have in place, and those are the climate, the Global Climate Fund or the GF, they are not very assertive with concrete actions in how to move ahead to secure land rights. The UNCCD, the Convention to Combat Desertification, in the land degradation neutrality, launched this land tenure issue as a key pillar into the strategy. The UNEP and FAO are dealing with the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, and the same, they recognize the importance of secure land rights. So what we would really like to call it, because we see there are 3 main challenges, and one is the increased competition that we mentioned before. Second one, even if we have very progressive law and regulation, those are not implemented. Even where there is, for instance, in Tanzania, the certification of pastoralist rangelands, village land, this is not very much implemented. And this would impede the local communities and indigenous people to contribute to both adaptation and mitigation. And finally, the numbers of land and environmental defenders that are under threat is growing. So we measure in 2021, thanks to Global Witness, which is a member of ILC, 200 people are being killed because of land. And so that should not be happening anymore. And so land rights are, in fact, more than ever a pathway out of climate emergency. And when it comes now, I have to mention the green wave is it's key to revert the climate crisis. But on the other hand, we cannot do it without people. There have been 2 cases in Uganda and Tanzania recently that people who were dispossessed of their land because of conservation area, they were killed by the venture of that area. And that's not, I think the idea that we can do conservation without people is an old idea. We need to be modern and very look forward to that. So I finish here. I hope it's been clear. It's not a model, it's a system where we contribute with different actions. Of course, we are very much interested to collaborate with any of you in research project and any collective action if you are interested on the topic of land rights. Thank you very much.